Ever get that feeling like you're digging into something fascinating and you just wish you could absorb a new language at the same time?
Oh, totally. Like, what if learning about history was learning a new language?
Exactly. Well, that's what we're diving into today. Content-based language learning. So instead of hitting the grammar books, you're picking up the language naturally by, well, learning something else.
Right. It's that two birds, one stone appeal.
Hmm.
And it's really taken off. Educators are going wild for it. We're talking bilingual education, immersion programs, even things like content and language integrated learning, or CLIL for short.
CLIL, catchy. So walk us through this. What does the research say about how well this actually works?
Well, the results are, how do I put this? It's not as simple as saying it always works like a charm.
Okay, so what's the catch?
Let's start with a success story. Take Canada. Their French immersion programs have been around forever. By most measures, they're doing something right. Kids come out fluent, confident, using French in their daily lives.
Yeah, those programs have a great reputation, but I'm guessing there's more to the story.
Exactly. One of the big surprises is that even after years of immersion, some students still struggle with certain grammar points. Think about it. You can be fluent, understand complex ideas, but still trip up on a specific tense or agreement rule.
Wow, really? I always thought if you're immersed long enough, grammar would just sort of happen.
You'd think so, right? But it turns out there are a few reasons for this grammar gap. One big one researchers found. In many immersion classrooms, students weren't actually producing a lot of language. They were listening, understanding, following along, but not necessarily speaking or writing in complex ways.
So it's like passively absorbing the language, but not getting enough practice actually using it.
Exactly. And to add to that, studies by Swain and Leister way back when in the 80s and 90s showed that certain grammar structures just weren't showing up that often in content-focused lessons. Things like the historical present tense or the formal vous in French.
Makes sense. You need to actually encounter and use those trickier grammar points to really learn them. It's not just about soaking it all in through osmosis.
Definitely. And this is where another case study comes in, this time from Hong Kong. They have this late English immersion program where students who've always spoken Cantonese switch to all English classes in secondary school.
Okay, so paint a picture for us what's happening in these classrooms.
Well, imagine you're a teenager, used to learning everything in Cantonese, and suddenly everything is in English.
Yeah,
Tough, right?
I can imagine. Did most students adapt?
It was a mixed bag. See, many teachers, trying to be helpful, would simplify the material a lot or even translate things, which seems kind of counterproductive when you're going for immersion.
Right, if everything's translated, are you even getting immersion?
Exactly. And the results were interesting. Academically, most students did okay. They understood the content, got decent grades. But their English reading skills lagged behind. It was like this trade-off. They were getting the content, but maybe at the expense of fully mastering the language.
So a real balancing act for educators, making sure kids understand the material, but not watering down the language so much that they miss out on the immersion experience.
Exactly. And it gets even more complex when you look at the case of Inuit children in Quebec. They often switch from Inuktitut to French or English for school, and it can be a really tough transition.
Yeah, for these kids, it's like going from 0 to 60 in a new language. Trying to wrap your head around math or science when you're still getting a handle on French or English. A lot to ask.
So did the research show if they were able to bridge that gap? Were they able to catch up?
Well, that's where things get a little, concerning. Teachers were really trying, simplifying things, breaking down concepts. But even then, many students still struggled. And this lag in academic language, it can really have a snowball effect later on.
It makes you realize it's not just about learning vocabulary, it's about being able to think in that new language, to really engage with the material on a deeper level. And that brings up a question I'm sure some people are wondering. With all these challenges, should we even bother with content-based learning? Is it just too good to be true?
Right, we've seen the successes, the French immersion programs, for instance, but then these potential downsides too. So what's the verdict?
I wouldn't say it's a matter of ditching the whole idea. It's more about recognizing that immersion is a tool, a powerful one, but not a magic solution.
Okay, I like that. So if immersion is one piece of the puzzle, what else do we need to make this work?
Targeted language instruction is a big one. We can't just assume those grammar gaps will magically disappear. We need to address them head on.
So directly teaching those grammar rules and structures, even as students are learning through content.
Exactly. Think of it like this immersion gives you the richness of the language, but direct instruction gives you the tools to actually use it.
I like that. It's like you can give someone a beautiful set of paints, but they still need to learn the techniques to create a masterpiece.
Perfect analogy.
Hmm.
And this is where this idea of developmental readiness comes in. Research, particularly by a guy named Peineman, suggests that there's a natural progression to language learning. You can't just learn anything at any time. There are stages.
So you can't just throw the most complicated grammar rule at someone on day one and expect them to understand no matter how immersed they are?
It's like you wouldn't try to teach a toddler algebra,
Right.
right? The brains just aren't there yet. Same with language.
Which explains why, even after years in French immersion, some students still struggled with certain grammar. It's about timing, about being developmentally ready for those more complex structures.
And here's another layer. These stages, they're not just about age or time spent immersed. A learner's first language plays a huge role too.
So someone whose native language is similar to, say, Spanish, might pick up Italian more intuitively than someone coming from, say, Japanese, like a head start almost.
Right, it's about these underlying connections between languages, which helps explain why some people seem to pick up languages more easily. It's not always about being good at languages, but about those existing linguistic links.
It's like everyone has their own personal Rosetta Stone based on where they're coming from linguistically. Fascinating stuff.
It really is, and it makes you wonder, should we be tailoring language programs more based on people's first languages?
Now, that would be personalized learning. Okay, but let's come back to content-based learning. If there's this whole developmental readiness thing, does that mean we should be holding back on content until students have perfect grammar, sticking to, like, C-spot run sentences?
Right, because who wants to learn a language that way? It kind of defeats the whole purpose of connecting with interesting ideas.
Exactly. So where does that leave us? If full immersion has its downsides, but so does oversimplifying things, what's the answer?
Well, maybe it's not about finding the perfect answer, but about recognizing the value of both. Even if full immersion isn't always realistic, especially without extra support, it shows just how powerful exposure to authentic language can be.
It's like you can't learn to swim by just reading a manual, right? You have to jump in the pool at some point.
Exactly. So the question becomes, how do we create learning environments that provide that pool, that richness of a language, but also give learners the support they need to actually swim?
To stretch that analogy even further, maybe we need lifeguards, swimming lessons, and some free time to just splash around and enjoy the water.
I like it. It's about finding that balance between the structured and the unstructured, the immersion and the direct instruction.
So for everyone listening, whether you're diving into a subject you love in another language or taking a more traditional class, it's about finding what works for you.
And maybe being open to experimenting a bit, because that's part of the fun,
Mhm.
right? Figuring out your own personal learning style, what clicks for you.
Exactly. And that's what we hope these deep dives do, give you a starting point, some food for thought, maybe inspire you to try something new.
And hopefully avoid some common pitfalls along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Until next time, everyone, happy learning.